Hello, friends, and welcome to LinkedIn Live's Learn Plus. My name is Brenda Bailey Hughes, and I am so glad you opted to join us today for a conversation about how to know yourself well enough to tell your own story. Those of you who are regular viewers know that for several months now, I've been focusing on the concept of story. How do we tell stories? Why do we tell stories? When are the best use cases for stories? And we've talked about stories that help us inspire others. We've talked about stories that help us influence. We've talked about stories that help us to have real clarity in how we're communicating ideas. But I realize that some of the most important stories that we tell are about ourselves. To tell us about yourselves, why don't you in the chat let us know who you are and where you're coming in from today. I'm in the Midwest section of the United States. It is a rainy day here in Indiana, but we are all keeping our fingers crossed that rain doesn't turn into power outages that cause us problems. So yeah, welcome everyone. So glad that you're here. We'll see where you are from. And maybe if you want to share why you chose this LinkedIn Live for today, what are you hoping to learn? That would be great for us to see as we get started today. So, and again, as I mentioned, we've been talking about all of these different reasons for storytelling. And then it dawns on me that some of the most important stories that we tell are about ourselves. And that story happens in a lot of different versions. So if you even think about all the places where you're branding yourself, your LinkedIn profile, for example, that's a space where you are telling your story. If you are interviewing, if you're in a space, if you're in a job seeking space and you're in an interview, that's you telling your story. If you're at a networking event and you're just getting to know people, or new employee orientation and getting to know people, or welcoming a new team, all of those are places where you tell your story. For those of you who have recently stepped into a leadership role, a team leader, a project leader, a supervisory role, people want to know your story because that helps them understand, how do you lead? How do you work? How do I best work with you? In all of these spaces, it's so important for us to tell our stories. And you're starting to tell us your stories by telling us where you're calling in from today. We've got Shelby from Tennessee. Shelby's also backstage, making sure all the technology things work. Natalie from Las Vegas. Welcome, Natalie. So glad you're here. Pedro, glad you're getting lots of feedback. So that's, he's getting feedback. If others are, let us know. But hopefully that's just you, and maybe log out and log back in. Pedro, we want you to have a good, clear sound. Thank you for that. Vincennes is in the house. Aaron, welcome. So glad to see you. Vincennes and Vincennes University is close to where I live and teach. Jay is here. So great to see you as well, Jay. Jay's one of in Amsterdam today. All right, great. So glad to see you. We've got Seattle, Washington, Tunisia's here. So wonderful to see all of you. Yeah, so the rest of you that are here, please tag us and let us know where you are. Welcome, Hannah. So glad that you are here as well. So when I thought about these stories that we tell about ourselves, with these other kinds of stories, where we collect them is in a lot of spaces. So maybe we go to the data, for example. If you're trying to tell a story about your own customer service, you look at your customer service data and you use that story to help craft your narrative or your story. Or if you're making a recommendation to your organization, maybe you look at financial data and use part of that as a way of telling your story. When we're trying to exemplify values, we find people who really live those values and we tell their stories. Sometimes I tell stories that are about historical figures, business leaders, as a way of inspiring, motivating, or educating others on certain tactics or strategies in business. But when it comes to telling your own story, that data has to come from you. And so self-awareness becomes a foundational skill to being able to brand ourselves, to being able to tell our own story. So when I started thinking I wanted to do a show around self-awareness, immediately I thought of colleague Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts. Gemma is a chartered psychologist. She has a great podcast that you're going to want to catch after meeting her today. She and I have known each other for years from LinkedIn learning courses that we've filmed. Never filmed a course together, but we've been in studios that were side by side. So we shared break rooms and hair and makeup and wardrobe rooms together, getting ready for our LinkedIn learning course filmings out in Carpinteria, California at various times. I think of, she's just a brilliant psychologist, but she's also focuses in on areas that are so interesting, like resilience and mindset. She's a distinguished authority in areas of leadership, organizational psychology, personal development. But my title for Gemma is she is the LinkedIn queen of self-awareness. If you want to know more about self-awareness, you just need to meet Gemma. And so I was thrilled when, despite an incredibly crazy, chaotic travel schedule this spring and normal life issues, Gemma said yes to being here today. And so let me please bring in Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts, and we'll get started discussing. Gemma, hi, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Thank you so much for being here. We're so glad to see you. I see that Corin is saying that she's taken every LinkedIn course that myself or Tatiana has done. That's great, Corin. So glad that you found the courses useful. Your next up, Corin, will be Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts' courses in the library. You're going to want to catch some of hers. She has a very similar style, I think, to the kinds of things you get with me and Tatiana. In fact, I just recently rewatched your self-awareness course, which might have been one of the ones you were filming when I was there. I was trying to do the math and figure out when it published, so that I might have been side by side with you as you filmed that one. But I'm so glad that you're here today. Tell us, let's talk about self-awareness. You heard the cue up here. We're thinking about it in terms of how to tell great stories about ourselves. What are your thoughts on why self-awareness is so particularly important in the work world of today?
Well, I think, a lot of us are trying to figure out what kind of work we want to be doing or what works for us in terms of work-life blend or work-life fit. And I think unless we're really clear on what we want from our working lives, then we're probably not going to be able to find it if we can't define that. So thinking about kind of what we value, what we want our experiences to be like every day. So I think self-awareness is really important from that point. But it's also really important from a development point of view as well, because if you want to progress in your career, so that could be taking the next role or changing careers completely or moving from education into your first job, for example, all of these big steps in your career, they take a level of self-awareness because you need to know what strengths you're bringing to the table. You need to know your development areas are, and you need to be able to talk about those as well. So think about in interviews, for example, you need to be able to talk about that, or think about if you're applying for a job, or if you're trying to plan your career, you're trying to get from, step here to step here. You need to know where you are currently before you can even think about what you're working towards, because then you can start building out a strategy or a plan about how you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. So and in all honesty, it impacts every part of our working lives. Think about relationships. If we want to build emotional intelligence, if we want to build strong relationships, the first thing we need to think about is ourselves and how, understanding ourselves, how we experience the world, and then also thinking about how we come across to others as well. So I think it's one of the most crucial things for us to be working on when it comes to our careers, because and self-awareness itself, really, there really are two parts, and it's
jump into that. It's important, and it's important just for all of our development, but I love that idea that it's important for us to even know what it is we're trying to develop into. If I don't know what I want, how am I ever going to get there? I love that idea. So it's important. What is it? I think we all have sort of a self-definition of, but you were starting to say that it has two parts. Like how do you define self-awareness?
And it's one of those terms that we've heard a million times, and we've probably even used it. You've probably even used it, talk about someone else, like, oh, they've got really great self-awareness, or they need to develop this.
Not so much.
When it comes to actually quantifying what it is, I don't think we do that very often. But really, it's about, firstly, being aware of yourself or knowing yourself. So it could be things like knowing what your triggers are when things don't go to plan, knowing how you tend to behave in different situations, knowing what your values are, so what you value in life and what's important to you, knowing where your boundaries are, knowing where your limits are, knowing what you're passionate about, what excites you. It's really knowing yourself as a person, kind of in depth. So kind of understanding some of that emotional stuff that goes on for all of us as well. That's the first step of self-awareness. And the next step is then thinking, how do other people see all those things? So how do other people see my behaviors, my actions, my responses to things, my attitude, so how it looks to the outside world? And that isn't necessarily to say that, you know, another person's version is different to yours. It could be exactly the same. It's not that the other person's opinion is better or worse, but it's just getting used to matching up how you see yourself
Right.
versus how the world or other people see you
Right.
as. And they're both parts of self-awareness because they both give you a perspective or a lens, or deep dive into kind of how you experience the world and come across.
I have I think it's a good example of what you're talking about. I had a colleague who had stepped into a management role, and one of his values or something important to him was he really wanted to show his new team members that he valued their time. He valued their time. I value your time, and so I'm not gonna fritter away your time in meaningless ways. And so he wouldn't stop by and chit chat with you at your desk. When he started meetings, he just started the meetings. Agenda item number one, let's go. And he's thinking, what I'm projecting is how valuable I consider you and your work-life balance and how I want to be efficient with your time and get you out of here as fast as I can. Well, some of you can kind of guess how he was being perceived was not at all the way he'd hoped. It wasn't, gee, he values us. It's he doesn't have time and he won't give us the time of day. He doesn't want to get to know us. And so that there was this mismatch between what he really was intending and then how people were perceiving him.
Mm-hmm. And that can happen for all of us. And I'm sure we've all got an example of, even, you know, we've all probably got even small examples of where that's happened. Some of us have really big examples of that. And it really is. But the only way we're going to get to find that out is by somehow gathering feedback. So that could be asking other people about how we come across. You might find this sometimes in companies where we have to do 360 feedback, for example, and we might have to kind of answer questions about someone else. But not all organizations have that in place. So there are ways that we can just ask for that feedback. We can ask people we trust, or we could ask colleagues or a manager how we come across and what we can do even better. That's a really great tip for feedback, is not necessarily asking what we're doing wrong, because that can be quite an uncomfortable question sometimes for people to answer. But what can I do even better? What could I get? Because that doesn't mean that you're not doing something right. It just means
Yeah.
it could be a teeny tiny little bit of improvement that you can make, and then people can share that with you. But the only way that we know how we come across to others is asking, because you can assume all day long. Because our intention, exactly like that example, the intention is to come across a certain way. So I don't waste your time. I want to be efficient. It's respectful. But actually, our intention might not be translating, because the communication part is the message that's heard by the other person, whether that's, you know, body language message, or they're getting a message from your words or your tone. We're not in control of that. Other people are in control of that. And the only way we can know is by asking the question.
Mm. And I like that nuance that we can ask the question. It's hard for people to give you honest feedback. So how we phrase that question is really important. And I think that the higher you climb on the organizational hierarchy, the harder it is to get honest, true feedback, because there's more and more of that power differential that makes it harder and harder to be honest with people. So the framing of the question, what can I do even better, or what could I do to improve a smidge, might open up an honest kind of conversation that, what did I do wrong? You know, where are my weaknesses? It's really going to be hard to get to. I noticed Shelby had asked, So let's say we do get some feedback, either somebody volunteered it or we've sought it out. How do we know if what they're saying is true? Now, I like your distinction. Well, it's true to them. So if we're asking, what is your perception of me? Truth is truth, it's their perception. If they're saying that we have a weakness in a certain area or a strength in a certain area, and we don't necessarily, that doesn't click for us, what do you do with that kind of feedback about yourself?
Well, the tricky thing with feedback is we need it. We need it to build self-awareness, and we need it to progress in our careers. We need it to grow, to develop in our lives in general. However, not all feedback is correct, and not all feedback is factual. Like it's a perception, it's subjective, it's someone's opinion. So my biggest piece of advice is when it comes to like knowing if feedback is true or not, exactly as you said, feedback is true to the other person. Whether it's something that you need to do something with or take on board or make a change, that's a whole different kind of area to work on. And I think there are a couple of things you can do with this. You could ask multiple people, so you're not getting feedback from one person. Now, there might be one person whose feedback is really important. It could be your partner, for example, or it could be your boss, for example. And there's something in particular that, for whatever reason, it's something you're going to have to do something with that feedback. However, sometimes but that's not the only way we build self-awareness. We want feedback from lots of different people, lots of different ideas, lots of different perspectives. So the best way to do that is to ask multiple people. So ask different colleagues, ask, you might have various mentors, or you might even ask different kinds of people. So you might ask a mentor or a coach for their feedback, and you might ask a colleague, you might ask someone in a different team, you might ask your manager. So kind of getting used to kind of collecting little pieces of feedback as much as possible in various parts of your life can really help you to then understand, okay, generally speaking, does that sound accurate? Like, are you starting to see patterns? Are people saying the same things? Because if there are patterns, then you probably want to do something with that.
Yeah.
It probably is showing you that is a strength, or maybe it is showing you that there's a development opportunity there. Equally, you might get a piece of feedback that only one person has shared, but it's so important, or it makes you think in a completely different way, or something you've never thought about before, or never considered before, that even though you've only heard it from one person, you might think, actually, I really want to do something with that because that really speaks to me for some reason. That's okay too. That's a good thing. So you're either looking for patterns, or you're looking for something that speaks to you for whatever reason. Either it's
That
really
one gem of advice.
you're the only one that will know that when you hear it. We can't,
Yes, yes. I've been reminiscing about my early career at the university where I teach, because I'm making a transition. And one person early on, I had led a retreat with a lot of people there, and one person at the retreat, probably on a written, really ancient style feedback form, just handwritten feedback form back in the day. This was 30 years ago. Said, Brenda is an amazing facilitator of learning. That was the phrase that he used, facilitator of learning. And I'm not sure that there was a pattern of hearing that kind of feedback, but that resonated with me so deeply. Not like, oh, she's full of wisdom, or, oh, she's a great trainer, but she's a facilitator. So much so that I leveraged that. That became my educational philosophy. It's like part of my teaching philosophy or strategy. And it was just that one person that said it, but it just, like you said, Gemma, it just, like, yep, that's it. That's right.
Yeah.
I get that. So one of our users said that, yes, take other people's feedback with a grain of salt. Certainly, we're not going to enjoy it, ignore it, but look for more of the patterns or those gems that Gemma just pointed out. And then Ravinder had pointed out that if we're being genuine, won't we come across as genuine? Won't our good intentions come across?
Yeah, I mean, well, when I'm talking about, and you're much more, Brenda, you're much more of an expert in communication than I am. But when I talk about communication, I talk a lot about intention versus what the other person hears, and the only thing we're in control of is our intention. So yeah, sometimes people won't. Sometimes how we intend to come across isn't how we come across, and for various factors. Some of it's in our control, some of it's not within our control. But it is really important to focus on that intention, because otherwise we can get really caught up in saying the exact right words or saying it exactly the right way. And the pressure when you're trying to do that can be really intense and overwhelming. And that can actually stop you communicating with others or taking action. So yeah, my advice is always to think about your intention and focus on that. But just be aware that sometimes your intention won't always be heard by the other person. And that may not be your fault. There could be other things going on in that social dynamic, which you might even know about. So
Yeah.
I think all you can control and think about is your intention, which is really important, and then getting these grains of feedback to find out, actually, is that how I'm coming across?
Right, right. I might be able to message my intention in different ways, through different behaviors, through different nonverbals, through different word choices. Exactly. You have mentioned getting feedback and getting feedback from lots of different people so that we're getting good pattern input and different voices into that. What are other ways we can start growing our self-awareness? I listened to Dr. Tasha Eurich, who writes a lot about self-awareness, and she says that the truly self-aware people are so far and few between. She's dubbed them unicorns because they're like these rare, almost mythical people that are out there. So knowing that it might be harder to be self-aware than we realize, what are some other good strategies for building it?
Something I like to use a lot is the ABC method. But that's really kind of dissecting your behaviors in different situations. So if you've come across a really big challenge and you've had a bit of tricky interaction with someone, or there's been kind of something major going on in your work life, you can do this after the event. You can look back at it with this ABC lens. And the idea is you're breaking down, A is the activating event, so the thing that happened. B is your behavior, and then C is the consequence. So imagine you've had a really challenging conversation with a colleague, and sometimes I'll have conversations with people, they'll say things like, oh, that person made me really angry, or that person made me react like that. Or imagine like you're driving in the car and someone pulls in front of you and it feels dangerous and you shout out or you toot the horn or whatever you do. It's very easy to think to ourselves, that person has made you kind of do that thing. But in reality, that's not necessarily the case, because there's this belief part in the middle. So it's activated event, belief, consequence. There's this belief part in the middle, which will then drive your behavior, the consequence. So you might think someone pulling in front of you in the car, that's really dangerous. They shouldn't be doing that. I would never drive like that. It's really inconsiderate. And that can make you quite angry. Or you might have a belief and think they're probably having a bad day, or who knows what's going on. They could be, sometimes I think this in the car, like they could be rushing to get to a hospital, for example, or there could be some kind of.
I pulled in short before. Oops, it happens to the best of us. That's another.
I have to remind myself, I'm like, no one is a perfect driver all the time, myself included. Think about a conversation at work that you have a really horrible interaction with someone, it hasn't gone well. And maybe their attitude wasn't great. Maybe they didn't deliver what they were supposed to deliver, but you'll have a belief about that. So things like they're always behaving like that, or they're not respecting my role in this, or they're not understanding that I need to deliver my part and they're holding me up. And that will shape how we then behave, which is the consequence, which we might then go back and be angry or shout or not find a way to kind of move forward. So this kind of dissecting, looking back, can be really helpful, because you're taking the sting out of it, the emotion out of it as well. And the best way to think about it, so when you're separating out, so you've got your activating event, then think about, okay, what did I believe about that event? Okay. And that can take some reflection. Okay. It's not easy. Like being self-aware it's not necessarily a pleasant experience. It's not necessarily like an easy ride, which is why so many of us avoid it sometimes. I'm not self-aware all the time because sometimes I don't want to know. I don't want to see the other person's point of view, because it's shining a light up to my weaknesses or the things that I'm not so great at, or the ways that I shouldn't have reacted, or so it can be quite a challenging experience. However, it's really necessary if we want to build really strong relationships and we want to develop. So that's something that I would recommend doing quite frequently, particularly if you've had a challenging interaction with someone. It could be in your personal life, it could be in your work life. And then you can actually even take this a step further and add in a D and an E, so after your ABC. So,
More letters.
I know, more letters, I know. And the D is like disrupting. So how could you disrupt that thinking? So instead of thinking that person's really rude, or they're not respecting what I need to deliver, or they always do this, how can you think something different? You might think, okay, maybe they don't know that I need to deliver something off the back of this. Like, have I actually told them that? Have I actually said I need that information because my client needs it, or I'm getting pressure this end for it? Maybe they don't know that they're such a crucial part of what you're trying to do. Maybe they do, but maybe they don't. Maybe there's something going on in their world,
Right.
which we're not aware of, or because we've all got our own lives going on as well. Or think about the car situation. All the things we were saying about not everyone drives perfectly, or maybe they're trying to get to hospital, but it's how could you change that thought in the future? And then the E effect. So what would the outcome? Then you got to test it and see what the outcome would be from that situation. But I like this idea of reflecting, and the reason another reason I quite like this is because in this situation, it forces us to reflect on the parts that we played in the situation. Because it is so easy to think about all the things other people need to do to reach a better outcome, or to help us get to what we need, or help us move forward. But actually, a lot of the time, there's probably more accountability that we can be taking.
Oh, yes, yes. I'm thinking of a conversation we had fairly recently. 3 or 4 of us were in the office, and we're all emerging from various parking areas and rushing to a meeting that we're all late for. And someone was like, I can't believe they've closed down the parking garage right now when everybody's on campus. Why couldn't they have done, why on earth didn't they? And I don't even know who the magic they is, but we're all mad at them, they, for closing down the parking at an inconvenient time for us. And, like somebody in the group finally said, yeah, with all the weather we've had, I would not want to be in charge of managing construction on this campus. And it changed the whole tenor. It was like that it was that disrupt. I think that was our D stepping in to disrupt this storyline that we were telling ourselves, that someone's out to get us and make our lives miserable. And to your point about accountability, I know the garage is shut down. I know parking is hard on a campus. Why didn't I leave my house 10 minutes earlier than I did so I wouldn't be late for the meeting? No, but it was so much easier to be like, somebody else's problem. Why did they do this to us? Yeah.
100%. We are all guilty of that. I'd say most days, most of us will probably have a moment of that at one point or another. And it just shines the light on what we can do. Now, that isn't to say that we have to put up with rubbish behavior, or, things keep happening, then we shouldn't look to change, like taking ourselves out of that situation or changing the situation where we can. However, it does, if you do go through this exercise, it does highlight that often that how we think about a situation will impact how we then behave in that situation, and it's not always positive.
Yes, so true. I love the ABCDE model. And ABC is good enough start. If D and E confuse us, let's just get at least that there's something that activated a particular belief in me that then caused me to have a certain consequence, a certain reaction to this. And if I rethink the B, the C might change as well. Really interesting. And then feedback from lots of people. 2 great strategies for us to start elevating our own self-awareness, which is such an important activity, because we're going to find times when we need to tell those self-awareness stories. Some of those, I know we have a lot of people in job transitional stages. How do you encourage us answering that sort of? There are 2 questions I think that haunt us all when we're in interview settings, because they both demand such a high level of self-awareness, but also while we're in this dance of projecting our best self, because we are in an interview. So what do we do when we are asked, tell us about yourself, and we're in an interview? Or maybe worse yet, the question of, tell us your greatest weakness, or tell us the time you've made a mistake and how you handled it. And what is there a good response to those types of questions?
Oh, I really dislike both those questions, and
Good, we all do too.
I dread being asked those questions. I really do. So the biggest weakness, I think, to be fair, I think that should be banned from an interview. I know it's not going to be, but I feel like, you know, I'm not sure that's ever a great question to ask. I feel like what people are trying to get at, if they're asking the question well, and or if they're interviewing well, what they're trying to get to is, we can't all be good at everything. We've all got development areas. So they want to know what your development areas are, which we all have. None of us are like the perfect model of what we're trying to achieve. Like we're all a work in progress.
Right.
So they want to know what our development areas are, and they want to know probably what we're going to do about it. That's kind of the next step. It's kind of implied, but you won't always be asked that explicitly. So, for example, if you're someone whose attention to detail isn't great, or it's not that it's not great, maybe that's not the best part of your work, or maybe that's stuff you enjoy the most. There's ways of developing that. There are strategies you can have in place. You can take things slower. You can check your work. You can have like a focus half an hour every in the morning, in the afternoon. There are things that you can do around that. So don't be afraid to tell people what your development areas are. And I would even, when answering the question, frame it as, I have a development area. I know that my development area is X, Y, and Z. I probably wouldn't talk about it as a weakness. You probably could be asked that in an interview, but I would frame it back as, this is one of my development areas, or this is my biggest development area I'm working on at the moment. Because
you're
then saying, it's not necessarily a weakness. It's, we all have development areas. We all have things we're working on. But then I'd also take to the next step and say, and because I know that, these are the things that I do to make sure that I'm not missing something, or I know that I'm not great with attention to detail, for example. So I know that I have to have times where I focus. It might be first thing in the morning. I try and do my really detail heavy work, or I get someone to check something, like when I'm writing something, I'll always do my best to get it checked where I can, because it's not, you're not saying I need someone to help me with my work. You're saying I will always, because I'm becoming, because I'm aware of where my development areas are. No matter what the role is, or you can shape it to that specific role. Even you can say, so these are the kinds of things that I do or I would do in this role, to make sure that actually it's not a derailer. It's something that, it's a skill that I'm building. That's what I'm working on at the moment. Yeah. Because by answering it like that, you're saying everyone has development areas.
And I'm self-aware enough to know mine.
Yeah, exactly. Like, at least I know what it is. Because the worst thing in the world is to be like, well, I don't really have anything that, or I don't have any weaknesses, because we all do. And by saying that, or doing the and I probably try and stay away from the perfectionism as well, because I think that's been used quite a lot.
Right. My students have been trying to finesse these, couch it as a weakness, but it's really a strength. Oh, I tend to work so hard, and it's like,
people are going to see
people see right through that, right? Like, I'm just such a perfectionist. I just never let anything get by me that's not perfect. Like, oh, come on.
And in all honesty, you are doing yourself a disservice by saying that, because what the person really wants to know is, are you self-aware? Do you know what you need to work on? And what are you going to do about, sorry, these thumbs keep coming up on my, I need to how to turn them off on my computer.
That did deserve a thumbs up, to not answer that question in that way with false strength framed. That deserved a thumb up.
No, I'm doing it to myself now. That's the maybe I need some self-awareness. Stop doing that. And the other question, like, tell me about yourself, is so hard. Such a hard question. But my biggest piece of advice here is prep something before you go in. Have 3 points you want to say. 3 to 5. It could be, I'm a psychologist, I'm really passionate about this, or I'm really interested in learning these kind of things. I'm a parent, or I'm a carer, or I've got a dog, I don't know. Just have 3 things that you want to talk about that you think reflect your personality, or what's important to you. Because I mean, it's a terrible question to ask in an interview. Sorry if anyone asked that question. There's some feedback. Because it doesn't give anyone, like, you're not saying like, tell me about how you like to work, or tell me about
Right.
your last role, tell me what
How do
you've
you
learned.
think you'll align with our values? How do you think you'll, yeah, it's just
So
too,
open-ended. And because you're in an interview situation, you're trying to impress someone. So the whole time you'll be thinking, what do they want to hear about? Like, what do they mean? Do they mean my personal life? Do they mean my, what I studied at university? Do they mean so my advice here is just have three things that are important to you at the moment. So, and you can even reframe it back that way as well and say, well, I'm Gemma, I'm a psychologist. The things that are important to me right now are this. The things that I'm working on right now are this. The things
yeah.
I'm learning at the moment are this. Because
Oh,
you're then shaping that conversation.
well, I think it's also because I have more than three things to say about myself, but I think the way I can help narrow the pool of things I might talk about is by looking at that job description that I'm applying for and thinking which of the many things about myself are relevant to this position. And that's the ones that I'll focus on when I'm asked that so broad of a question. Well, if we're in interview situations or getting to know you situations, there's a good chance that we're making some sort of career transition. I'm curious about self-awareness in those moments. And I will confess, I'm asking this as much for myself as I am for our learners online. I've always strongly identified as professor. That's been my title for 23 years. And now, as I'm retiring from that role and exploring new roles, it's not like I have an automatic new title. We connect to those titles, we connect to our roles. How do we stay grounded when our self-awareness takes a little shake because of these career transitions that many of us are in?
I think kind of reminding yourself that we're so many different things. And I think that's partly why I hate the question, what do you do, so much. I hate being asked that question. I was away for a weekend with some friends. I was talking about it this weekend actually. And I was like, I hate when people ask me what I do for a job, because I've got quite a complicated, weird working life. Like ultimately I'm a psychologist. So I'd normally say I'm a psychologist, but that doesn't really explain what I do day to day. I run a business and I do LinkedIn Learning courses, and like there's so many kind of different, like the podcast, and there's so many kind of different facets, and author and all of that jazz. So I end up just saying, oh, I'm a psychologist, and don't really know what else to say because it gets a bit complicated. So I think because we so often our identities hang on what we are or what our profession is, it can be really challenging. Like you said, it can be really challenging when that changes. So I think again, it comes back to this reflection piece on thinking about all the different roles that you are. So you could be a carer, you could be a parent, you could be a psychologist, you could be someone that's in training, you could be. There's so many different parts to us, and maybe that's a lesson in general of not necessarily hanging our whole identity on our job role, because it can change. And then or sometimes we hold our identity with the company that we work for,
Yeah.
or the university that we're at, or the university we've been to, or the college, and that can be really dangerous if that changes, and it can feel sometimes quite threatening, and you just don't really know where to start. So my advice here really is, again, it comes back to that self-awareness part. What other things are going on for you? Like what other roles or responsibilities do you have in your life? You can even go, think about things what you're learning, what you're working on, what you're curious about, because we bring so much more to the world than our job profession, for sure. And even if you love your work and you really identify, I really identify as a psychologist, I really really do, but equally that's not everything that's going
Mhm.
on in life. So I think it takes a little bit of reflection and thinking perhaps to do that, and it can be really challenging.
Well, and I think it's useful to us to allow that some time and some space for that reflection. I think if we just run from one title or company identification or university college identification to the next, to the next, to the next, we might miss the beauty of that fallow ground and letting some things bubble up for us. I would love, I know our learners that are online are going to want more Gemma after they've met you for a little bit of time here today. So I know you've got the self-awareness course in the LinkedIn Learning Library. I strongly encourage all of you to take a look at that. Self-awareness is part of emotional intelligence. So if you want to step out and take an even broader look at that, I know Gemma has an emotional intelligence course in the LinkedIn library. So watch that to learn how to build emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness plus. And then once you've watched that, watch my communicating emotional intelligence course in the library, which will help you not only have that emotional intelligence, but be able to project it into the world. Gemma, if they need more Gemma, besides your LinkedIn courses, where should they find you?
The easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn, to follow me on LinkedIn. But I've also just launched a new kind of learning and coaching platform, the Mindset Matters Hub, which has got tons of information on this, tons and tons. That's what I've had meetings about that, so it's on my mind. There's kind of coaching videos and all these topics to do with well-being, performance, self-awareness, anything psychology based in the workplace, really, or to help you kind of navigate some of those challenges and changes in the workplace. Everything is going to be there on the Mindset Matters Hub. But the easiest way to find out about that is basically to follow me on LinkedIn, because I will be thinking about those things.
Oh, good, good. So, Mindset Matters with lots of great resources. Make sure you check that out by following Gemma. Always, if you haven't followed me, please do. You'll see some resources coming out, short videos, posted tips, and links to courses that will be coming up. Gemma, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your wisdom today. I feel like I have a path forward on becoming a bit more self-aware, and so excited about that. Alan's plugging the book. There we go. That's great. Love that. You didn't even mention the book.
I know.
Thank you all so much for being here today. We'll be back on June 17th with Learn Plus with our guest Param Venkat. We're going to continue our conversation about storytelling. Param's working in a really interesting space around story and value. So I think you'll enjoy that and learn a lot from him. I look forward to seeing you all in June. And Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts, thank you again for being here with us today. Take care, everyone.
Bye.